Welcome to Weird Games and Weirder People, a podcast about role-playing games and the weird, wonderful people behind them.
Hello Weirdos, this is Diogo Nogueira and I'm here again to remind you that we have a Discord server for weird games and weirder people where you can hang out, share your favorite kind of weird art, share your creative process, share all the weird things that you like, and if you like the show you can subscribe to the show wherever you listen to your podcast, and please, if you would like to support us, write us a review. If you have any coins left from your last adventure, go to co-fi.com/WGNWP. And for today's guest, we have none other than Adam Vass, the sorcerer behind the World Champ Game Co. He's the creator of games such as Cybermetal 2012, Babes in the Woods, Soul Burner, and more recently, 1978, a Halloween-inspired game of horror. We talked about creating games, we talked about how his process is when he does that, how he draws a lot from music. He's also a musician. He talked about his work as he tours around the country with his band, and he talks about how his podcast, The Brintus, has just returned. We talked about how weird can be universal or it is very cultural specifically. He talks about how he's always, thinking about games and writing games, even when he's doing the tour with his music and the band. He talked about how he tries to be more present in the community, how he, tries his best to have a good output in RPG creating, but also tries to dial a little bit back and be more present, with the people that he loves and his friends and his family. He talks about the stuff that he's working on and how he believes we kind of are all connected when we talked about spirituality and things like this. It was a very interesting chat. I liked it very much. We had a lot of fun. So let's get weird with Adam Vass. Hello, Adam. Welcome to Weird Games and Weirder People. How are you, my friend?
Hey, I'm doing well. It's great to get to talk to you.
Yeah, finally seeing you. Through a camera and stuff, but it's great to put a face to the name and into the logo.
Right. Likewise, or to my stack of books that you wrote, or our Instagrams where we interact most often. So it's very cool.
Yeah. So for the weirdos out there that maybe don't know who Adam Vass is and the fantastic work you do at World Champs Games, so who are you? What is that you do? And if you can you share just a small weird detail about yourself, maybe a habit that you have or the way you do coffee or any weird thing you do?
My name is Adam Vass. I live in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where I design, illustrate, and publish tabletop role-playing games as World Champ Game Co. Some of my more popular games that you may have heard of that definitely fall into the weird games category are my stoner metal science fantasy Necronautilus and my low-tech cyberpunk game Cybermetal 2012, among many others. I've released probably over 100 games in the last 5 years. And a weird thing about me, I think, is I thought about this before the episode, so I came prepared. It's just that I sing a lot, even though I'm not a good singer, and I'm not singing along to things. I just will make up songs for my dogs when I look at them, and I think part of it is a ADHD thing of just I need to make sounds sometimes, and so I'll be I'll be doing my coffee in the morning and just kind of scatting along, or definitely sing to the dogs a lot. That's my weird trait.
I catch myself doing that sometimes, and small words people say trigger songs, and I just start singing. But I also sing about the stuff that I'm doing sometimes too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have two dogs, and they both have very distinct personalities, and that comes through weirdly in the songs that I write for them. Our kind of anxious, more skittish dog, Beans, he gets dark wave and kind of gothy music and then we have another dog named Frankenstein, who's a little bit more energetic and social, and so he gets kind of poppier, almost like country like music when I sing to them.
Very nice. I love that how, for someone that like dog's a dog, but for us we have all these personalities. Like we have three black cats here, black kitties, and for people, how can you tell them apart? But you're just looking at them, like their eyes, like the way they move their tail, or like it's clearly not the same cat, like, but for
Right.
everyone else they look, it's just like three black cats that look exactly the same, but it's very weird to notice these details. And but then you go somewhere place, and you see a cat that just like yours for some reason.
Right. I
Yeah.
think part of like our world, our creative output as game designers too, is like we're projecting emotion and humanity. We're almost like making characters out of these creatures. Like I
Oh
said, when
yeah.
they have music, like certain kinds of music that I think they like, it's obviously they haven't told me that or responded to any kind of music that I listen to, but I'm sort of assigning those like emotional and social values to them, and it sort of weirdly reflects how we design and create characters in games that we write.
Yeah, I mean, the last person I interviewed here was Sean Smith, and he said that a good tip is like create NPCs inspired by your pets, or pets that you might have had. That's a great. I had ideas for
Yeah.
using some of them, but it's a great way to think about a different kind of NPC, because a very common tip is like create NPCs based on celebrities or movie characters, for example. But I never thought about pets, because it's in some ways a lot better than any of those characters,
Right.
and they're
Yeah.
so you know
And they won't
unique
get
in some ways.
offended when you treat them
Oh
weird in the
yeah,
game. They won't know.
yeah. Uh, Adam, how would you define weird for you, and how do you seek that in the work that you do, or in life in general, in the things you're interested in?
Weird to me, I think, just means outside of the lens of popular culture. I guess insofar as like majority culture. I think especially like growing up in a suburb and being one of the handful of people who was into like um, heavier or emo music, that made me weird because it was less than the majority. So I'm like sticking out. I think um, role playing is kind of weird in its by nature, again being like the minority in the tabletop world, like board gaming being such a cultural zeitgeist, and even that is weird when you think about like
Entertainment in general,
normal people. I guess is
yeah.
a phrase I use a lot. Just like yeah,
The normies, yeah.
normies, people who aren't depressed, people who don't have these sort of like I don't know. I think it's a weird thing because I've been so ingratiated into what I would say is like subculture and counterculture since I was a teenager, to the extent that I like don't understand and can't. I'm not necessarily as able to communicate or find common ground with people who aren't weird.
Yeah, it's different, because I think a lot of those people maybe would like to be, but they always I'm noticing that a lot now, how we are like raising our kid here, and seeing how our grandparents react to some of this stuff. It's they live through the expectations of others, so they have to conform to those expectations. They have to be someone that others want them to be, but not necessarily, because others are preoccupied with their own shit. So
Yeah,
nobody really cares, but you think people care, so you have to live according to this insane expectations.
right. It's like a fallacy, and
Yeah.
a lot of that I think comes from capitalism and the idea that you are
Yes.
meant to be
You have
raised to
to
someone
work.
who
Yeah.
follows
Yeah.
the rules and works and is
Yes.
productive.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Do you think, weird, because you mentioned like it's something outside of culture? Do you think there is anything that can be weird universally? Because, every person has its own culture. We live in a big world. And
Right.
even though, uh, American culture in a way has like colonized a big portion of the world because of entertainment, and pop
Right.
culture. But do you think there is anything that can be, universally weird? And how would that function?
Um, that's a great question because I think weird is a cultural, it's like a sociological concept, and I think what I was describing that otherness comes from that idea of like a monoculture and a sort of singular ideal, whether that's aesthetic or way of life or whatever. I think things that are innately weird are things that exist outside of our understanding of reality. So I think
Mhm.
sci-fi almost always specifically is weird because people are imagining these like alien creatures and societies, and they sort of exist outside of our lived experience. I think just imaginative things are innately weird because they are these um,
Outside of reality in
concepts, and
general, yeah.
they exist outside of our perception, and because of that, I think it's going to go through each individual person's like lens of their life and their
Yeah.
worldview, and I think that's what makes it cool and weird is that it's going to be so subjective. I guess that's a good way to sum it up. Is I think like subjective surreality is weird.
Yeah. Subjective surreality. And that's a great term. Yeah. You mentioned, how you already see RPGs are weird, and I always ask, guests like if they think RPGs are weird, and you mentioned about being the underdog of games or
Right.
like culture. It's a new medium and etc. Even among games, right? Uh, but what would you say is your favorite weird part of role playing games?
um I think so. It's funny too because I'm thinking, role playing is innately weird as an activity. Like for we as adults to make believe is what's weird, but it's not weird for when kids do it, because it's something like
Yeah,
innate
culture.
within.
Yeah,
Right? Yeah,
outside of
exactly.
culture. Culture can admit that adults can, play.
Yeah.
Capitalism, adults have to work and
hmm
responsibilities. You can have space for fun. Fun is
And
for
then
kids.
and then
Yeah.
as you continue to focus and zoom in on this sort of like cultural microscope, you think of like if the frame is the world of role playing, then like D&D and fantasy role playing is going to be sort of considered the least weird most of the time, just because that is the majority of what tabletop role
Yeah.
playing is composed of. So I think the more zoom in you go, and the more weird, and there's always going to be like something that becomes weirder by comparison. And so in role playing, I think one of the weird things for me is in play just visualizing the events that are being told. Um, I can't remember what the name of the concept is of just like being able to see things in your mind. Like, I don't know if you remember a year or two ago, there was the whole thing on Twitter on if you can picture an apple, like if you see the word apple, do you
Oh
see
yeah.
an apple? And I never thought about this because I've only ever had my own thoughts, so I can't I never thought to um, question how the other people's
Yeah.
brains might work with that. But I see very, very vividly in my mind's eye, I guess. So, um, like for the apple comparison, like I can practically hold it in my hand, I can feel it and taste it
Yeah.
and like see it very vividly. So when I'm playing a role playing game, whether I'm thinking about what to do next or I'm listening to other people narrate or whatever, it's like full on taking place in my head. And I think that ability to visualize or conceptualize in video ways or visual ways, um, is
Yeah.
like the weirdest thing for me because it's cool. It's where I get a lot of the enjoyment from playing, but it's
Yeah.
also um yeah, kind of crazy, like this whole thing that no one else can see or experience in the way that I am is taking place inside my head.
Yeah, and the also great thing about this is that it is a shared experience. Like we are all, in some ways, like not everyone can visualize, as you're saying, but a lot of us can visualize that, and we're having the same experience. But everyone is seeing it in a different ways. They like
Mm-hmm.
each have their own unique, movies. And as we play, parts of everyone's imagination start to, pollinate everyone else. So
Yeah,
it gets to a point that some elements are common, but it gets more, homogeneous as you play, but it's still very unique as each new element is added. So I love that aspect of games too. And something that you said about this, the visualization remind me of a bit by Pete Holmes, the one that inspired the podcast, that he talks about how we have eyes and ears in our minds, like we can visualize the apple, like we can hear a song that is not playing.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
I
I,
think
I love this. Yeah,
a major part of my creative process is just tapping into and uh, exercising that ability. Um, I'm also a musician, so I hear a lot of riffs and parts before I play them, and it's just like the more capable I am of taking something from my brain to my hands, the
yeah,
better a player I am. And then I find that is true with game design too. I think ruminating and kind of searching, almost like I compare it sometimes to scanning a radio and looking for the right channel, which I recognize is something that will make sense to you and me, but um, teenagers don't have like no one listens to the radio anymore.
yeah.
That's a whole side
Yeah.
thing. I had to
Well,
listen to the radio recently, and it
mm,
shocked me how they're still playing songs from 1993 that they act like are new, like the
that's the
Foo
only
Fighters and
people
stuff.
that's still listening to radio are the people
Exactly.
that listen to radio, right?
um,
Right.
so it's
Yeah.
very strange, but that metaphor of like moving the dial and waiting for a channel to come in clear. That's kind of how I picture my creative process and how I'm looking for ideas and mechanics and how to make X, Y, and Z fit together in this puzzle piece, whether it be games or songs or whatever kind of creative thing I'm working on.
Yeah. Like, there is this, concept thing. I read a lot about, artist books, and something that I read in, I think it's still like an artist, that, artists have a really good taste. But sometimes, we're playing catch up to, get there for skills and craft, because our taste
Yes,
is
yeah.
fine. We recognize what is good and bad. So as we practice more, we are playing catch up for skills, I guess. And something that
Yeah.
I was gonna ask, about the visualization thing that you said. Do you visualize like your games and books that you make before you make them? Like you imagine the book and how they're gonna feel, and then you start making them, or is this like a process that?
Not exclusively, but definitely yes, where there are certain things um, like iconic images. Usually the cover is usually one of these things. Sometimes a
Yeah,
few spreads where I can kind of see it or like imagine it before I'm coming to fruition. And like you said,
yeah,
where I'm waiting for my skills to catch up, I think a lot of that filtration comes from my own physical ability to render something. So um, I think about, for example, the cover of Cybermetal 2012 is this very scratched out illustration of a goat skull that has like a guitar input in its jaw and like wires everywhere. It's barbed wire. This sort
yeah,
of techno cultist weapon made out of a goat skull, and that I visualized and came up with way before I drew it. Then it took me a while to draw the
yeah,
one that ended up being the cover because I'm translating an idea into a physicality. And especially when I was with that book, I worked in traditional media, so I was drawing with pens and ink. I wasn't drawing in Photoshop. So because of that, it just took longer. It took a while for me to make the one that matched my vision and then went to print.
Yeah. I was just wondering because people say that like visualization is so important to setting goals. So I was wondering like if you're like I'm gonna make this game and you visualize the book and how it's gonna be, and then you go for it, or that's just
Yeah.
because I imagine like I want to make like a Primal Quest, core book, like a fake hardcover. So I imagine it like the feels, and that kind of motivates me, to get there. So I have to write more. I have to do this, and it's kind of
Yeah.
a goal. You set like you visualize a goal, and it's something that I'm even thinking about. Game design too. Like you when you make adventures and settings, how to make goals visible. So even if it's not, if you don't have like to give to the players, oh, you have to do this or that. So try to make goals more visible so they can visualize and go for it in like in their own evolution. So that's what I was asking. I'm all over the place, but the
Yeah.
visualization had me thinking about this and how this is all connecting.
Yeah. I am my brain's always doing something. It's always making some kind of
Yeah.
noise, and um, it took a while. I mean, it's still. I think it's an everyday. It's probably a lifelong process to learn how to like um, focus on the parts that are valuable and find the ones that aren't, and figure that stuff out. I think this also comes from having OCD or having any kind of like neurodivergency of like
No.
your brain's doing stuff and you're not in complete control of it. Like you can't just say like I'm about to have an idea, right? Like you can hope to, but you're
Yeah.
never in that level of control. So uh I don't remember where I started this, but this to say like the visualization, the sort of scanning for ideas is always going for me. It's always active.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. It kind of connects sort of thing that I talk about dreams. Like, do you usually remember your dreams? And I joke about this because about this visualization that I'm always daydreaming, and for some reason I don't remember my dreams. So I
Yeah.
joke that I for some reason I use up all my dream energy while awake. So I don't know.
I've
Do you
never made
remember
that.
your dreams?
I don't. Generally I don't. So
Yeah.
that's a funny. I wonder if they are connected in some way because they probably
Yeah.
are tapping the same well, and that well's got to be empty by the time I go to bed.
Yeah, because I'm seeing a pattern like other guests here that you know creatives too that they dream a lot and talk about spend a good portion of their time as sometimes daydreaming, and they always don't have dreams too. So
Yeah.
maybe there's a connection there. I don't know. Do you have any kind of ritual or practice that you do before starting doing your creative work or before you sit down to make music or make art or write?
Not necessarily. I think just sort of preparing the space, I guess, is part of my ritual in terms of if my desk is like super messy, it's always kind of messy, but if it's really messy, then it's counter. It doesn't work. It doesn't help my brain, you know. Same with music is like it sort of innately gets messy when I have cables and recording interfaces and physical stuff in the way. But as long as I can control the things that I can control and make, again, not necessarily clean, but functional the space that I'm in, um, I think that's a huge step for me to just sort of minimize distraction and kind of get into the zone and take that
Yeah.
breath and like focus. I think for someone like me who has the ideas and the inspiration, it's just a matter of getting it to the page or getting it to the software or whatever, getting it from your brain to somewhere that someone else could interact with it, and that uh, can be hard for sure sometimes.
do you do anything maybe to help with that? Do you set a routine to force you to sit down and try to put it on paper? Like, to how do you approach, your work? Like, do you try to sit down every day like a certain hour? There's artists that put on shoes even if they work at home. Do you have
Yeah.
anything like this?
Um, I don't, and I often think that I should, and I think it would probably help some of my processes and some of my ability to focus. But I'm just winging it all the time, um, because
Yeah.
my like music is my other career, and it's very polar insofar as like if I'm on tour, I'm on tour and I'm doing just that. But when I'm not on tour, I'm just at home. So um, my schedule is very fluid. I just go with like what I feel like doing, which I recognize is like an enormous privilege. If I feel like I want to paint a picture today, like that's just what I'm gonna do. Um, if I feel like developing a game that I'm working on, then I can sit down and focus on that and make the deliberate attention and time. But if I feel like just playing video games and kind of like seeing, turning your brain off in a little bit and then seeing what happens when you're paying less attention. Um,
Right.
that's
That's
something that
very
I often
important.
will
Yeah.
do. Yeah,
That's part of the creative process too,
for
letting
sure.
the things rest, and then a composter, let it rot so it can feed the new seeds, I guess.
Yeah,
you
I
you
find that
mentioned.
I find that
Go
I use
ahead.
that as an excuse very often, though. That I don't really
Yeah.
have any idea that's really sparking me right now, so I'm just gonna hang out for a while.
Yeah, I mean, it's a balance, right? We have to be very conscious about this.
Yeah.
Y- you mentioned, being a musician and being on tour. I didn't know you made shows. So how is how do you do you play while you're on tour? Like, do you write while you are, or do you make other kind of art? But or when you are traveling and making shows, you're all about that, or do you?
Um, I would love to say that I take that time just to be on tour, but that's definitely not true. I'm writing like the whole time. Um, the last tour I did was in August and September. I was in Australia for about a month, and in the time that I was there, I was working on all of my Halloween releases. I did 5 RPGs that came out for Halloween. So
Yeah.
2.5 of them I wrote while I was in Australia between touring and being on planes and being traveling. I have done tours where I don't work at all, and or rather, tour is the work, but and with that too, I'm doing things day to day. So like, I am the art director for the band as well, so I like do our logos and our merch and everything.
Yeah.
So during
That's a
tour, I'm still working on all that stuff.
great deal for the band, like a musician and
Yes.
an awesome designer.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's funny. When I'm not on tour, music can get pretty far away from me. I don't play every day or anything. Um, but the inverse is not true. Like if I'm on tour, I don't leave games at home. That's still kind of really present in my mind. And it takes some work to try to chill that out. Uh,
Yeah.
I've also luckily got to play games on tour a few times. Depends who I'm out with and what everyone's kind of energy level and vibe is. But I've had a few. Our band has played uh, a few games while we travel, and that's really fun. But for the most part, my like games anchor while I'm traveling is still just like doing the writing and layout for my books.
Yeah. I mean, we see clearly how music influence the games you make, the art that you make,
Yeah,
and now I'm like wondering, does gaming influence anyway the way like you do music, or the way you approach your work with music?
this is I mean, short answer is yes for sure, and but I'm only becoming more aware of that pretty recently. Partly because like I started playing role playing games with D&D in 2016. So like not that was 8 years ago, but I was not a kid. Like that. I was a little bit late to the game, I think. Um, not culturally, because I think obviously we're in the uptick now of like cool
Yeah.
indie games and a lot more players. But for me, as like a 30-year-old or whatever, I guess I was 28, but like learning how to play role playing as a adult rather than like in school. But so now I'm like so much more well versed in games, and I joined my band. It's called La Dispute, and I joined in 2007. So 17 years ago, which is crazy to think about.
Yeah.
And I didn't know anything about games back then. Um, when I started to dip my toes into game design, I got to make a couple games for the band that we like made as merch, which was really cool. Um,
Nice.
and now so we're working on a record now, and I have found the two biggest things that I can pull from like game, not even necessarily game design. Like I think people who play games would have this same kind of thing, but um, one is that our music is very cinematic in that most of the songs are stories being told, and with that, I can take. I'm studying story structure all the time with games and with music, so um, I can make sense of it through my lens of fiction. I can visualize again scenes that are taking place, and kind of like you're almost like making a soundtrack with the music composition. So there's definitely a lot of parallels there, and like how I learn how stories work from gaming translates really well to how I convey narrative through music. Um, the other thing, weirdly, is just safety tools. I think
Hmm.
safety tools and games in general, but like my ability to communicate with people in a creative shared language, and also emotionally convey ideas. Um, I get that's been super uh, assisted, I guess, by the experience I've had in gaming. And now that we're writing this record and we're doing the creative process again, I find myself so much more able to communicate on both a intellectual and emotional level with the other people in my band, that is helping to get ideas across. It's helping to make sure everyone's voice is being heard in the conversation. It's helping to make sure that we're all getting along, because it's a grueling process to be in a space and being told like you have to do this. You have to make a certain number of songs by a certain length of time. Um, the ability to communicate my thoughts and um, my boundaries and just sort of how I'm feeling, which was really I am I am a masculine person, so especially in America, that was not my ability to convey emotion and understand my
Yeah.
own emotion was not
Yeah.
prioritized.
For
So
sure.
it's kind of a later in life thing that I'm continuing to learn. But in doing
Me too.
so, I can recognize immediately how much it benefits my relationships with people. And
Yeah.
specifically because I've been in that band for 17 years and I've known them for even longer, we have deep social roots, and the ways that we communicate kind of default to the ways they were when we were teenagers. So it's taken a lot of active work to not undo that, but to build that in a more fruitful way and
Yeah.
find
Improve
the
on
right
that.
words to
Yeah.
say and the right things to
Yeah.
interact with.
Yeah. Now that you're saying this, I've started to think about how much, we learn from RPGs, being like a social hobby, and like you have to interact with people. And recently I discovered I am autistic, and now, and how that may have helped me, socializing and getting to know people and learning how to lose, and that's something that I'm using with my kid, to help him with those issues. And yeah, I learned so much. RPGs can teach us, games can teach us so many things,
Yeah,
and
it's
role playing games.
it's awesome because I think people, especially again outside, that's the normal culture thinks that we're all just like
Yeah,
goofing off when we play games, and to some extent we are, and to some extent that's good. But yeah, we can
the best way to learn. Yeah,
learn about ourselves in through play.
yeah, it's the best way to learn is through play. I would say, and
Yeah,
I think everybody would benefit through learning to play anything. I would say, like, educators are using games a
right,
lot more and in very positive ways, that we like, instead of just memorizing books and charts and doing
right.
standard tests and stuff like this. So yeah, yeah. And I think as artists we are always seeking to learn, right? Because always
Absolutely.
have this thirst
That
for knowledge and how to use it to
yeah.
create stuff, I think, because
Yeah,
everything
that
is
is kind
full of.
of my I've been thinking about this a lot lately, that that's just like the thing that makes life worth living or like exciting, is that wanting to understand things and wanting to discover things.
Yeah, and there's always new stuff to learn. I mean,
Yeah.
you will never be done. If you're curious, if you want to seek and learn new things, there is so
Yeah.
many incredible stuff out there. So yeah, Adam, do you do can you identify any main source of inspiration for where you draw ideas from? I always say here that I draw a lot from my childhood, from like the shows and comics and movies and everything that I treasured as a kid. It was like my refuge. Do you have anything like this? Any place that you can identify where you draw a lot of your inspiration from, or is just really everything out there?
I think my biggest inspiration historically, I would say, is music. Um, and as you mentioned, I think a lot of that comes through in the aesthetics that I
What kind of music?
into.
Yeah.
Yeah, so growing up, or like as a teenager, I listened to a lot of emo, like early 2000s kind of um, underground, I guess. But I was playing in bands then. I was listening to records and downloading. That was kind of, again, like showing my age, but the Napster and
Napster,
SoulSeek
yeah.
era, like, and because of that, I had this privilege of having like infinite access. I could find any song, or I could find a song that I like, and then find that artist's whole discography, and that
Yeah.
discovery aspect really fueled me into finding cooler and more unique and special things, and continuing to do that. So that led me into like screamo and hardcore, um, which I kind of listened to through my early 20s. Still listening to a lot of emotional and sad stuff. Then as I got into like my late 20s and now my 30s, I started to listen more to metal, and specifically like stoner metal and psychedelic stuff. And some black metal. And I think the way, one, that like line that I can follow from hearing Green Day in fifth grade and Nirvana, to then being in high school and listening to bands like These Arms Are Snakes, and then how that brought me into like more screamy and emotional and intellectual music. Um, and I think that's a pretty direct influence on the games I make, where I'm taking my upbringing and taking, the t-shirts and the record covers and the show posters, that aesthetic, into how I do layout and how I organize information and how I illustrate. And I mentioned I'm the band's art director, but I've been doing that also since I was a teenager, of designing shirts for bands and record covers and that stuff. So
Yeah.
it was very intuitive for me to translate into book design in that way. Um, but with that, I think I bring also a lot of the themes and ideas and politics and explorations of these niche cultures into the games that I design, where I can make a game like Necronautilus that is about, it's gaseous clouds that are doing missions for the god of death in outer space, which
Yeah.
sounds awesome and super gonzo, but like that's also a game about how we are able to communicate and how language means different things to different people in different contexts, and how memory and duty and this idea of what you're supposed to do can kind of skew who you are, and how that relates to self identity and gender and all these other concepts that I think um, there's a level to that game that is explorative sociology, or like, what is your place in a social system? Um, and I think that's really interesting for me to play with in games, both as a designer and a player. But I also think that you could still play that game and just, explore volcanoes
Yeah.
and do space travel without
Yeah.
engaging. I mean, on some level, it
You are
encourages it
engaging.
mechanically,
Yeah.
right?
You,
But
maybe
you
they are
might not
engaging, they not realizing. Yeah. Yeah.
yes, you might not walk away with like, I like to think that my games aren't super heavy-handed in that way and preachy, but me designing them is my act of exploring and questioning a lot of these social
Yeah.
norms.
Yeah, that was I was gonna ask. And like, would you say the games you make are about you and your explorations? And you
I
mainly like I have total conscious that I make my games for myself and for the things I'm interested in or I'm focused on or experiencing. I have ideas for making games about stoicism and and now thinking about autism too. But like, are these the things that you're thinking about and you materialize them in music and in games?
I think I think I think the answer is yes, and I think the answer is also that I just became aware that I was doing so kind of after the fact with
Yeah,
some games, and now I'm leaning into it a little bit further.
yeah,
Because I also will design games that I want to play, like you were saying, yeah, I want to do cool, weird stuff that I feel like I can't do in a lot of like traditional elf adventure games. Like I want to be doing weird demonic punk stuff, like throwing shows in the sewer or
yeah,
whatever. But at the same time, I think Necronautilus was about that sort of idea of who am I and how do I fit into society. And then when I made Cybermetal, that one very specifically is about me and my life. And I think the city, the pentagram city, which is the setting of Cybermetal, is based on Grand Rapids, where I live. There's locations from
wow,
this city in the game that are like skewed and altered to fit the tone, but it's also about, you're playing as rat people and demons and robo corpses and stuff, but it's a game about being a again, air quotes, normal person, like an everyday person. I call it scumbag role playing a lot, because you're not the heroes and you're not going to take down the megacorps, but you have 10 people in your gang that live in this abandoned church, and like the best you can do is take care of each other and look out for people who are being oppressed. And I think that mirrors the experience that a lot of us have, is you,
yeah,
especially unfortunately the left-leaning people in America who recognize all these bad things that are happening, and how America leads the charge on so many of them and does it deliberately, and it feels very powerless, and it feels like, without being a senator, like I have no voice and I have no ability. But that's not true. I just have to focus on the things that I are on my level, and I try to put that into that game and
yeah,
say, you're interacting with the people who are in the streets in the city where you live, because you are on those same streets. You're not colonizing a far off land. You're not toppling infrastructure. You're street level, regular jerks doing your best. And with that too comes my power fantasy comes from, rather than like toppling industry, it comes from fighting cops, or like rescuing people who are, in that game, like infected with computer viruses or whatever. because I think that's how we can influence our world around us is by staying on and being aware of your own kind of power level for this metaphor, and interacting with the people in your community who are similarly minded and similarly abled, and you can accomplish change and enact your vision of the
Yeah.
world more successfully, I guess I would say, because you're working within your means. And I think I in writing that game, it was very autobiographical. It was very aware of the city, and even like Grand Rapids is a city, but it's not big in comparison to the U.S. And the community that I'm a part of, and that I see other sort of active social communities in our area and how they operate, and finding a lot of joy and in that awareness, and how if you are turning a blind eye, or if you're looking towards Washington, D.C. to fix things, you're
Yeah.
ignoring and missing the progressive acts that are being done by people like you in your area. And I think that was both an eye-opening experience to consider, and then an inspiring thing that led to, again, like a very gonzo and weird game that could it it could fail at conveying some of these ideas, right? You could play the game however you want to play the game, but in terms of design and writing, I want to let those ideas and politics inform their design and what the book is, and so it
Yeah.
serves functions to different types of readers and different players.
Yeah, that's what art does too. Like it can
Right.
be something for you and something for everybody else. But I think that message is so important, and it's also very healthy, because sometimes we get preoccupied with, with the big news, or like, oh, this war going on there, like the grand things that happen in the nation, that we really can't do much about it. Like we can vote, but besides a revolution of the masses or something like
Right.
this, we really can do. But and it's unhealthy to focus on that so much, because it causes anxiety. I know, during the elections, I was like super anxious, like always focusing on this. But
Yeah.
doing something, and having a positive impact in your local community, and seeing how you can do good stuff, and connecting to people, and being present, and forming a community. uh, and for I'm sorry about this, but yeah, sometimes forgetting a little bit about the big stuff that you can do something about, because at least for me, there is for anxiety. I
Yeah.
strive to forget a little bit, and think about yeah, the impacts, like, and I what I have under my control. What can I do? It's I think it's a helpful way to put it on a game. It's and games are a teachable thing, even though maybe someone doesn't capture all this teaching immediately, but
Right.
it's in there somewhere, right?
I think that's a way to take back power from people who make you feel powerless, is to
Yeah.
recognize where it can be applied. And like in a silly kind of RPG metaphor, that's why you don't send your wizard up front into hand in hand, like, because the thing that they're best at is area of effect and doing spells from afar, because they have less armor. You send your barbarian, your fighter up front. So thinking about that in sort of social structure, I'm not going to run for office because that's not where my strengths will serve me or the group. So my strengths come
Yeah.
from using my brain, finding creative solutions to abstract problems, and like doing what I can to facilitate community in those regards.
Yeah.
So, um, yeah, I think playing to your strengths, metagaming, I guess, in the real
Metagaming
world.
life. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a great way to see, like, how to metagame life. It could be a great title of a book, right? How to
Right.
metagame life. Yeah. Uh, do you, Adam? Do you identify any, maybe other creator artists from any kind of media, maybe from games, from music, or? paint or anything that inspires you, the way they approach their work or the way they do their work or their philosophy of life in any way?
Yeah, there's a lot. So I'll try to stay
Yeah.
focused. I mean, one person, the singer of our band, his name is Jordan, and I think he he's been my friend since we've been teenagers, and I don't know that I think I'm becoming aware of this as we get older. Is just how influential he is to me in terms of um, understanding some of that political sociology that I was just describing of your he's someone who talks the or walks the walk in addition to talking the talk, and I learned a lot about how uh, cultural outreach and community works through him and through both in our music and his home life where is a lot more active with like people experiencing homelessness and food scarcity, and uh, that's really inspiring for me. um, I'm very inspired by my partner Alex. She owns and runs a coffee shop here in Grand Rapids called Morning Ritual, which actually is also a location within Cybermetal 2012. But seeing how she fosters community through a place, through um, drinks and through care and curation of art and community, and how people respond to that, people grow close through the coffee shop as pretense to human connection, um, is something that was really inspiring for me. In terms of games and more explicit, like under art, I guess both Jordan and Alex are artists in different ways, but more directly influencing me. Will Jobst, who is the co-host with me on the Brain Trust game design podcast, um, has designed games like Torque, and then we've worked together on a few games like Campfire and
Oh yeah.
A Guide to Casting Phantoms. Will and I got along immediately upon meeting. We met at a zine trade at Gen Con before Kickstarter was doing Zine Quest. So like this was true zinesters and people who were coming up doing that stuff. It was still there was 5 or 6 of us there, but Will and I got along really well, having again sort of like a connectivity through art and our understanding and desire of making art, and then we've worked together since then, since meeting in 2018 or something like that. We've worked together really frequently, and we still do our game design podcast. Now it's weekly, so Will's a massive inspiration in just like getting my brain moving in interesting ways. They're my sounding board. They're my vibe check whenever I have an idea that I'm not so sure about. They're just like one of my closest friends. Um,
Yeah.
and then last, I am sure he gets mentioned on this show a lot, but Johan, who I know you just spoke
Oh,
to, Johan Noor, some massive inspiration. Aesthetically, I think before I was aware of Morkborg and the work that Johan was doing, I was making games that I think were interesting and outliers, but I think I was afraid to go all the way or to really, I was still trying to make things palatable and commercially viable, I guess. And seeing Johan just do his thing and be a real person and a real artist in this space implicitly allowed me to let my freak flag fly and go full tilt with the art that I wanted to make and the mechanics that I wanted to use and go all the way in and make these weird auteur kind of games without the fear that no one was going to care, because at that point it was a real art project. It wasn't something that was for the audience, and even I think it finds an audience or the audience finds it in a different way, but that art style, that liberation that Johan sort of uh, symbolizes rather,
yeah.
um, that has been inspiring to me for a long time, and we actually just got to meet in real life at PAX about a
Oh,
month ago,
awesome.
and that was
Yeah.
really nice to have that moment of like recognition and just kind of like talking to you today, just have that moment of we are more than our art and our products. Is like we're people and we get to
Yeah.
connect on this human level and just like
Yeah.
have that, and it's kind of blissful in that way.
It's my favorite part of convention is just hanging out
Yeah,
with people, other creators, and sharing a meal, sharing a beverage, and just talking about weird stuff that we like
yeah,
doing what we're like doing. This is my attempt to uh extend Gen Con
right.
indefinitely. Yeah. Adam, are you working on any project right now? And would you like to share a little bit about it, or how weird it is, and what is your favorite part of the project you are working on?
um, Currently, I'm developing a game called Bloodborg, which is speak of the devil. We're talking Morkborg. This is a Morkborg compatible standalone game. This will be my second one of these with last year
Yeah.
or with Soulburner coming out a year or two ago. Um, Bloodborg is sort of a 80s style vampire urban fantasy,
Mm.
kind of inspired by Lost Boys, but also more modern vampire movies like Bliss or My Heart Can't Beat Unless You Tell It to. It's really been fun and interesting to sort of like put a pin to. Someone who also inspires me wildly is Richard Kelly, who publishes games as Sprinting Owl. He makes like a game every week. He makes something and publishes it every week. And sometimes I worry that I'm working too much and making too much stuff. And then I see him and he's putting out. We did a book a couple years ago called Fiskborg that was the fishing
Oh
supplement for
yeah.
Morkborg. Richard wrote that and I illustrated, but he wrote like all of it in probably 3 days. And then
Wow.
I just had to catch up with drawing a ton of fish. Super inspiring, but has such an active and inspiring mind. And I've been really interested in Katorkborg, his like sort of cosmic horror Morkborg hack, and just seeing how
Uh,
to approach different themes and different settings with those mechanics. But back to Bloodborg, I'm making a game that's again kind of like street level fantasy. You're vampires in this city, but you're not running the city. You're kind of outcasts, you're sewer dwellers, you're gutter punks, you're dumpster divers. Like it's going to hit on a lot of those themes that are in Cybermetal 2012 in terms of um,
Community and impacting a
com-
small group.
community and finding
Yeah.
your place in the world, but also because it's Morkborg and because it's vampires, I get to turn up some of the extreme factors and have, draining the blood of every cop be like a mission. Like I get to do some more intense, cool violence for fun kind of game stuff that I'm really excited for.
Does it have any kind of apocalypse mechanic? Like other Morkborg games,
So
or
the game takes place after the apocalypse. Actually, it's supposed to be 2,000 years after Morkborg, like this sort of dark fantasy world. But the rapture happened, and just no one really noticed. The gods took all the really faithful beings who were without sin, which left pretty much an unchanged world in Morkborg. Everyone there is sinful, and everyone there is not spared. So the apocalypse was almost invisible. People don't even notice that it has changed. But this is 2,000 years in the future, so culture has changed. We're in again like an urban fantasy setting with skyscrapers and technology and that sort of stuff. The sort of apocalypse in this game is more personal in that your characters are being hunted by someone who's randomly generated and for reasons that are randomly generated. But rather than the world is going to end or the city's going to fall, it's you are going to end, and you have to either do what you can before that end is inevitable or stave off that end in whatever ways that you find. Because I think with vampires specifically and that concept of immortality, it's not true immortality because vampires have weakness, right? Like they have a couple things that can kill them. So it's functional immortality if they're smart about it. But if there's someone pursuing you and you don't know where they are and it's constantly looking over your shoulder, and it's that feeling again of mirroring our lives of like, the world
death
is
comes for all of us. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. And the idea that you're a vampire doesn't save you from that. It just limits the ways that you can be harmed and makes you more aware of the ones that still are there.
Yeah.
So,
highlights the other ones. Yeah.
The pending apocalypse is your personal demise, and everyone is facing it all the time. And it's a little more active again than it is in our everyday lives, but it is still reflective of that sort of nihilism and constant fear and living in 2024 where things just kind of feel sketchy all the time.
Yeah, they do. But I think it's great because it's more personal, and then vampires are like cursed beings. So having this pressure all the time, and does the like the counter, does each player rolls individually, or the doom happens to everyone at the same time, or like this?
It's sort of a choice between a play group. If you have 5 players, it probably make more sense to have like one thing following you. But if it's 2 or 3 players, then it might make sense that everyone has someone after them individually, and you're working together to kind of like help one another try to mitigate those things. So
maybe in a longer campaign too,
right.
You can explore this individuality more and like more focused games play, like for a one shots or So you have to.
I like that idea that the game can meet your needs based on how much you want to play it, how deep you want to go. Similar to most of my games is like you can play one shots, you can play longer, you can engage with these social themes, or you could just sort of like bury them under the action and immersion, and that's fine. But I want to make I want to make my art still utilitarian insofar as I can. I want, especially in role-playing community, there's so many different styles of play and preferences and stuff. So once you get past the aesthetic and get past the production and the writing and the flavor and everything, I still want you to have fun at a certain point.
For sure, yeah. It has to be meaningful. It has to be attractive in some way to interact with, even, have all the themes. It can be different things in the same thing. Like, a game isn't just one thing, so it can be this fun. It can be very philosophical, but it can be still very strategic and no gameable too.
Right.
I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Are you looking for a D&D podcast with a dark side? Something more like Game of Thrones and less like Monty Python? Tale of the Manticore is part dark fantasy audio drama, part solo D&D RPG. There's no plot armor here. The dice make all the important decisions. Join me as I resurrect the excitement, wonder, and emotion of old-school D&D. Made for a mature audience, Tale of the Manticore is both a fiction and a game. It's the story where chaos rolls.
Hello Weirdos, this is Diogo Nogueira and I'm back with a word from our sponsors. Me! I just released a new game called Cosmosaurus, in which you play a dinosaur space ranger who protects the galaxy from evil threats such as slime bankers, undead pirates, and Cosmosaurus from a void dimension. It's a game with a rules light system inspired by Forged in the Dark and Lasers and Feelings. It comes with a bunch of tables for you to generate content for it. If you know my games, they're really easy to play and they have tools to help you improvise and play with low prep. It's an ideal game for one-shots, short campaigns, and introducing new people to the hobby, and it's a really perfect family game. I play with my kids all the time. It's a game inspired by Saturday morning cartoons. It's really well illustrated by Lucas Kowalski from Poland, and with a great layout by Guilherme Gontijo. It's a really fun game. You should check it out on ttrpg, itch.io, or exclusively in print on exaltedfuner.com. I have many other games there, check them out. All the links are in the show notes, so click there. And let's get back to Weird with our chat. Do you recognize any mark of like your style, like your voice in your games? Like, do you have any weird thing that you see a trace of yourself in your games? Like, what would it be if you said like, what is your weird mark that you can recognize in your games?
I think this is like not subtle, or maybe for the readers it's subtle, but I will put myself in almost all of my games. Like literally, not just like this is my experience, but there can be a character named Adam Vass in that setting, or there will be like a picture of me as one of the characters. I do that a lot. It kind of started a little bit tongue-in-cheek, and also sometimes out of necessity of like, I need a model for this pose, so I'm just going to take a picture of myself with my iPhone, and then that character ends up looking sort of like me. But in other times, I have full on just leaned in and said like, there's a character named Adam Vass in the setting, and he is me, and that's fun to me. And I also like the idea of people playing with this fictional version of me. We say sometimes as like RPG designers and publishers that we're like playing with your table, like they're playing our game using our words, so we're getting to play. But then like stepping that up an extra level and saying like, I'm metaphorically or fictionally, I am there, I'm in their game. I think that's fun and silly.
It's almost like an action figure, like figuratively, yeah. And how do you put yourself in this game? Like, do you try to be portraying like an actual representation of you? Do you represent, certain aspects or idealizations of yourself? Or how do you present yourself, in different games? It's always like the same character, or because of this game you focus on this facets of your personality or this other, face?
Yeah. That's a good question. I think it changes between games. I think I wish, now that you asked that I had made it more uniform and that I was kind of this omnipresent character. And in some books, it's like very subtle. So in Cybermetal, there's a timeline of important political events that took place between the 80s and now that you should know because they inform the setting, but it's not like you're going to have a history test at the end. One of the items in the bullet list was just that I was born, and that's the only mention of me in the book, in the text. But there's 2 or 3 images in the book that are me. One specifically, there's a graphic showing the NeuroNexus port on the back of someone's head, and that is me. A photo of me that I drew over, but it's like, I'm not trying to change it. Like, I want that to be the Adam Vass of Cybermetal 2012. But then I have games like, this is, I have a zine called No Game, which is not a game. It's like philosophy about games presented as if it was games text. And the narrator of that book is me, and my face is on the cover. And that was also like, that's the omnipotent version of me, I guess, not like in fiction, because that one's difficult to wrap my head around and to talk about because it's things that you can play with, but I wouldn't call it a game. But it's also one of those weird kind of like, what is a game philosophy questions sort of things. So
I'm very curious. I'm gonna look for this for sure. It sounds great.
I
An
I
exploration, of the form. I think that's something we need more in RPGs. Like we
yeah
need to explore more the boundaries of this weird media that it's fairly recent. So
yeah. I think a lot of the joy I got from publishing in the last few years is uh, questioning that and trying to push on the walls of what I think a game is, and a lot of that comes in print. I love print, and I print
yeah.
almost every game that I make. But you know, we all have the half letter hardcover and softcover book format down. Um, what else can there be? And like,
but
I
I
did
mean,
a
it's still with that, like the way you play it, how the way you explore the dynamics. Like you're sitting
mhm.
on a table, you have players, you have the GMs. How we can like, play with the dynamics of play, not necessarily, yeah, it's a book, I
Yeah.
know, but
Oh, right.
yeah,
No, I think there's like infinite conceptual
yeah,
levels to how we interact with that, and I think the way that you write the text, the format that the text is, if there is even text. I think about like uh, the sticker game. I think Cassie Mothwin wrote the sticker game this year, and it's all guided audio prompts. And
oh,
I'm like, that's so like that's
yeah,
unique. That's cool. Like a game is a playlist. A game uh is a Rorschach
yeah,
test. Like um, thinking about I don't know their real name, Skull Fungus, the artist who did that
yeah.
book that's in like an alien language, a game book that's in a language that can't be read. And that's like such a fascinating exploration of the idea too. And
I think
then
it's
you come
Schoolboy. The Skull Fungus is the guy that makes cartography, that makes Isle of X. I think it's Schoolboy that makes the art. That's kind of
I think you're
cartoony
right.
too. Yeah,
There's a
yeah,
lot of skulls floating around. Yeah.
yeah. Old school. Yeah, old school. Is yeah. People like skulls for some reason.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, what would you say is like the weirdest game you ever played? It can be either like role playing games or video games or board games, or even if it's not the weirdest, but a game that you played recently that made you think about games in general, the way how strange and weird it was for you.
uh, I'm looking up the author of it before I say, but the game, one of my weirdest game experiences, is this game I played at the first Gen Con I went to. So I think it was 27 or 18, or 2017 or 18. And it was called Dance Till Dawn, and it's a story game by Barrick Blackburn and published by Density Media, which is Barrick's brand, or like he's a zinester. He's like an old zinester, so it's just a cool small format thing. And it's a game that you play with Scrabble tiles and a music playlist, and the songs that come on kind of inform. They're like the soundtrack almost for the scenes that you're doing, and you use the Scrabble tiles to like trade narrative control between the players and like staging the scenes and whatever. But there's this fluidity and this abstraction that came from it. And I mentioned I played it at Gen Con, but I played it at like midnight at Gen Con, and I was working for a publisher, so I was on the floor all day, stayed up for this game, and so was truthfully a little bit sleep deprived, a little delirious. Barrick ran the game for the creator ran the game for myself and one other person who I didn't know. Like everybody was strangers, and we picked this sort of 80s new wave adjacent, like The Cure and the Smiths and like all this music that I love as our
Great, yeah.
playlist. And it was so strange. And I was thinking about it today too, in that this was very early in my RPG playing life as well. So I never played anything like it. I mean, I still haven't, but it's also before I was aware of and could even understand or conceptualize the idea of safety tools. So I definitely had some things that were like across my line, but I just went with it. And it ended up being this really abstract, really sad, and made sadder by the fact that the Smiths was on quietly in the background and it's 1 a.m. Just like it was almost like vignettes, like slice of life. We didn't necessarily tell an explicit story, and there was this psychedelic aspect of like the character having out of body experiences or seeing themselves doing things in different times and through different lenses and cameras. And yeah, I'm not doing a great job because it was an experience of describing it, because it was something that could not, I don't think it could be described. It couldn't be summed up in a story kind of way, but it was so intensely emotional. It like nearly brought me to tears. And, and it was this completely unique experience that I had with two people who I've never seen again, like a completely fleeting thing for me, you know? I haven't played the game again since then, not on purpose, just, you know how games are. And,
Never had a
I never
chance
saw the
again.
other players. So it's just like this little bubble that took place for me. And I think, you know, me talking about it now, I kind of want to write a letter to Barrick or something and be like, this been 6 years and I'm still thinking about this. And now
it's a fantastic game. The impression it made on you.
Right. And back then I had made a couple zines and stuff, but I wouldn't have called myself a publisher or even probably a designer. And I will see Barrick every once in a while will back a game that I made or something, and I'm glad that I'm still on his radar in some way. But I would love to like send something more sincere and be like, that game really not only was it like a really intense experience, but it probably on some subconscious level and definitely on other conscious levels, but just like changed my trajectory as who I am as a artist in the RPG world.
Now that you said it, like I think we need more letters, like sending, it's nice to send a message, but having send a card and thank you about the games that people made, it kind of made me want to do this for other people too.
Yeah.
I love when I receive zines and and people always send like a message, talking something, and JP sent me a zine from his patron, and he wrote, "Keep it weird," because of the podcast, and it means so much. It's the connection. It's a great thing that I love about this hobby and the community of creators is how we connect to each other, and we don't feel like rivals. We feel like friends, and a community. It's great for me, and
I compare it a lot as like an artist collective, because we're all creating stuff. We're all inspired by one another. There's innately a level of competition because of capital, but it's not something that we necessarily are pushing or engaging with directly. Like we live in a world that has capitalism. So like we're not competing directly. There's just sort of the audience is projecting that. And we get to champion one another's work, and we get to see one another evolve as creatives and communicate. I to circle it back to how I learned so much about my ability to communicate with other people and foster those relationships, even more so in the game space where I'm having, and this was also a product I think of quarantine, was finding and fostering closeness with people online. Like Will and I, who are best friends, we talk multiple times a week on the phone and on Discord and stuff, but like we've hung out in person probably 5-6 times, like because COVID happened right a couple months after we met, and we lived in different cities. So, and then I got to like we have a Discord server for the Brain Trust, our game design podcast, which became sort of a game designer hub, which is really cool. But I got really close to a lot of those people in the last few years, and getting to meet them now in real life now that either I'm touring or we'll be at a convention or whatever, those things being part of our lives again, getting to make real those connections, but it just amplifies and reiterates that idea that we are peers who are working together on separate projects or on collaborative projects, but the idea that we're all artists and all of our work is in conversation with one another, and
Yeah. I think
using that
we're
to
bigger
forge
together
connection.
than
Yes.
if yeah, we're stronger together than if we see it as rivals. And I think we'd lose a lot because, as you said, like we inspire each other, and we learn so much about each other. Studying the work of one another is, yeah. Do you have any other hobbies, that you do just for yourself? I know you make art, you write,
Yeah.
you make music. Do you have anything that's it's just for you and then use it just,
I
as
wish I did. Although I have no flaws with, or like no qualms, I guess, with how much of my life is creative pursuits. Like I know that it's a privilege, and I recognize that it's awesome that I get to pivot between writing and playing music, and then writing and playing games, and then like painting and drawing. Like that's great, and
yeah.
that's so cool. I
I was
do.
joking before interviewing you that I would say like you are who I wanted to be, like you make so much, and it's and you print your books and you send your own stuff, and then it's really
Yeah,
inspiring.
I love that. I mean, that
Yeah,
comes again from the music background of like, I want to hold a record. I want to press the record, like streaming
yeah,
doesn't feel the same as vinyl or even CDs did or tapes did. Um, so I'm that person, and I'm printing everything. I'm doing everything I can myself. I'm shipping it out of my house. Like I love how involved I get to be with my
yeah,
creative output. But I still do get to do a lot of art just for me, painting and drawing, and yeah, I illustrate my games and stuff. But I get to make time to engage with those in fun ways. I actually, for Christmas, I got a Dremel tool so that I could try engraving glass and trying to see
wow,
if that's like a medium that's interesting to me. I just recently bought a wood burner, and yesterday I burnt my first piece of wood with this cool little skull and dagger design. Because I'm to go full circle, constantly loving to learn and explore new media and see how different things feel. But that I do have the bad habit of sometimes falling in and saying like, how do I put this into a game, or how do I sell this? But I do make a
yeah.
decent effort to make visual art for myself, more than games and music. That's one that I can still keep.
Do you have paintings in your house? Like, do you hang your art in your house in
A
any way,
little,
or
a few. I have a huge collection of art and prints as well, so I'm in competition for wall space in terms of,
yeah,
do I want to put someone else's piece here or mine? Um, my partner lives with me, and she's a bigger advocate for my work going up. Uh, if I was here by
yeah,
myself, I don't think I would, but I appreciate that she does and encourages that. And then
yeah,
there's like, we have like kind of themed spaces, I guess. Again, our kitchen is mostly Western themed artwork, and so I don't think I have any of mine there because I'm from Michigan. Um, but in the living room, we have like sort of a family portrait wall where it's pictures of us and illustrations of like our dogs and stuff. And so I can paint our dogs or the two of us as a portrait and comfortably like put my art up there in conversation with these other interpretations of our family. And I think that's cool.
yeah. Well, Adam, now I would like to ask a little bit more about personal questions, experience you might have had, and how was the end of the year 2023, and what are your expectations for 2024?
I finished the year with sort of a sprint of. I mentioned releasing 5 games in October for Halloween.
Yeah.
I also just like the week before Halloween, I received the print edition of 1978, which is my newest role playing game that was manufactured. So I got the pallets of that delivered to my house and shipped that out to all the backers right away. So like, it's a game inspired by the original Halloween movie from John Carpenter. So I wanted it to be playable for the Halloween season and like have it in people's hands. Um, and then I said, okay, I'm done. I just did 6 games. I'm not going to release anything for the rest of the year. And then I did. Um, I made a solo game called Letters from the Liberty Motel that was part of a collective. So this was really exciting, but I did I curated a project called the Wonder Cabinet Invitational, where I bought a bunch of trinkets and photos and postcards and stuff from vintage and thrift stores. I mixed it all up and I sent it to some of my favorite designers, and then we each made a game based on the ephemera that we received, and then we sold like a collection of the 6 games that came as a result of that project. So Letters from the Liberty Motel was my inclusion, my submission to that group project. But writing that, printing that, and then collating everybody's games, that was my big November project. Then I went to PAX the first weekend in December, which was my first games convention as world champ, which was really exciting. Then as soon as I got home, I caught COVID. I was out for a week, and then it was Christmas. So now that I'm like looking at all that and saying all of that in a row, I'm realizing that I haven't really taken a breath in 2 months.
Yeah.
But that's kind of normal for me insofar as I've always got some project that I'm working on or some idea that I'm chasing. So it's been a lot. I think 2000. I say this every year, but my goal this year is to chill out just a little bit. Bloodborg is
Yeah.
my one big project, and I'm trying to keep it that way and not do another like boxed game this year.
Yeah.
And I'll probably do a couple zines just because like that's fun for me and that's easy relatively. Like I just enjoy doing that as like a fun little project. I'm going to publish. I at least have one friends game that I'm going to publish this year. I'm hoping my partner has expressed interest in designing a game on her own that I want to publish as well.
Nice.
So I think this year will be. I've World Champ has always just been my thing because I do, writing, design, layout, illustration, all of it is just me. So it was just easier to say, this is my brand and I do it all. But when I started, I always wanted to be that DIY punk like record label for games. And now I get to finally use some of that knowledge and publish stuff for other people. So that's my plan for this year, is to make a few less games and be a little bit more deliberate about the time that I'm spending in game work. And but I also recognize that we are expected to record our new album in the fall, and that's its whole other, like, that's a project that's bigger for me than a games Kickstarter. So like I say I'm only going to do one game, but I recognize doing one record is still so much work. So I'm thinking about it now and working on it. We've already started working on it, but it's a process that takes like 2 years. So it's a lot.
Yeah. Why do you see the need of limiting your output in game? Like, do you feel, are you feeling tired? Do you feel that you're working a lot, or are you starting to feel a burnout or anything, or are you afraid of because with me it's a little bit of both, but I realize too that I get hyper focused and I forget everything else and it's all about gaming.
Yeah,
And
I'm that
is
way as
this with
well.
you? Why
And
are you limiting your
I,
work?
I am that way as well, but I also think for me that leads to really extended periods of being burnt out, to the point where sometimes I don't even recognize it as being burnt out. I'm just like, wow, I'm still okay. Like I'm out of breath, but I don't know why, or I'm sleeping a lot, but I don't know why.
Do you have
And
problems saying no to projects and
oh
ideas?
yeah,
And because you mentioned like, "Yeah, we're only gonna make one game and it made thing more. Like when an idea comes to you, like you have to make it, or can
yes,
you? Oh, okay,
I have
yeah,
to make it. And I have to start right now. That's kind of my thing. It's like, I don't wait. I open Photoshop and I start making the cover the second I have the idea. It's a blessing and a curse, because I think that
yeah,
excitement, that energy comes through in the game and its production. I wouldn't say it's a hard rule that I'm only making one game, especially because I recognize I'm going to make some smaller projects just for fun. That's just going to happen because that's always how I am.
yeah. You,
Um,
you make other games to procrastinating
yes,
from making the game
yeah,
you're supposed to
and
be making. Yeah,
I do a lot. I have a Patreon where I just charge my backers if I make something. So like, it's not every month, but it has, like, for a couple years it was every month, where I would just make a game and send it to print and have it be a physical, finished, complete idea. Um, Doing 12 of those plus 2 or 3 Kickstarters a year, like full air quotes full scale games. Um, that was what was invoking the burnout. And even when I wasn't touring, like when quarantine was happening, I wasn't touring, but I was still making that many games. That's like a bit much. But as you mentioned, I have to do it. Like, I have to do it if the idea is there and I want to and I'm excited. So I'm kind of always chasing that feeling, and I love being creative.
yeah,
I'm always flexing those muscles, and it makes me feel good. Like, that's where a lot of my self-worth comes from, is creative
yeah.
output. So I
It's
won't
kind of
say
therapy
no.
too. Yeah,
Yeah, it can be,
yeah.
but I think it's also a little bit dangerous for me to engage with too much,
Too
because,
much.
like you
Yeah,
said, I'm starting to ignore or be less present in
present.
conscious life. Um,
Yeah.
so this year, and again, like I say this every year, and I kind of go back and forth on its success, but I just want to be mindful of why I'm making things at all times, and whether or not making those things is for me, or at what point does it become work, or at what point does it become like, I need this game to come out by this date for sales, or whatever, compared to like, I need to make sure that my voice is heard through this piece that I'm making. And the latter, I think, is fine, but when I
Yeah.
start making concessions and start like doing things differently because of external reward, that's when I start to be like, all right, but you gotta focus.
Yeah, yeah. Or step away for a while and remember why we're doing this. Isn't
Yes.
like it's not for awards, recognitions. It's love of the process, right? I'm always trying to remember that. Like it's about just creating something. It's really the most rewarding part, right? Because when you start to focus on the externals, you forget about the joy of just creating, and it's gets too stressful for me at least.
Yeah, I feel that.
Yeah. Adam, have you ever, talking about weird experiences, maybe, have you ever had out of body experiences or anything that you felt, you know, out of your reality in some way?
I would say, yeah. I think a lot of the time, I mean, I think out of body is almost parallel, or like it almost rhymes with the kind of like flow state that I think we
Yeah.
get as creative people. And I find that I get that a lot when I'm playing music, that I'm just kind of like vibing. And it's not so far as it's not as literal, I guess, as like seeing myself perform. But a lot of the time I compare like having an idea for a song or for a part, um, is kind of like it's floating in the ether, like the collective consciousness or whatever. And my ability to then take that and put it through my hands and play it, um, is a process that exists like kind of outside of me, that I can foster by developing my skills, but that it's sort of a almost spiritual process that's coming through me. And I think I get that with games a little bit too, is like having an idea and having it click into place with mechanics and language, can feel kind of like that flow state and feel like that magic almost of just seeing things work, seeing all the pieces. Sometimes I don't know if you watched the show Heroes when it was on, but the villain early on, what his name's Sylar, and and he would steal abilities, but his actual ability was to understand how things work. And they show an episode where his parent was a watchmaker, and you could see all the gears fitting together and working to make this watch tick. And sometimes that's how I feel my brain is working, that I can just look at and kind of conceptualize and understand on a spiritual level how something works, and then take it through my lens and through my goals to then make something work. So like, again, the idea of a part and then my ability to play that part, or my idea for a game mechanic and then it working. They feel that sort of supernatural, weird type of like, they just happen. They feel kind of magic in that moment. And I think that's why so much of my life is dedicated to creativity and learning and doing those things, because that to me is like the most fulfilling and kind of spiritual experience that I ever have.
Yeah, it's almost kind of a religion too. It's like the spirituality. Do you connect a lot art and magic? And if you do you have anything that helps you, get into those magical states? I was gonna ask, maybe about, because I know for me, I started using psychedelics to do with anxiety, but I'm pretty sure, I have experimented with it and helped me connect with the subconscious, or uh, helps me live, this standard reality a little bit, and make other connections. And it's kind of spiritual in some ways, have these rituals. Cultures have this. So have you ever had any connection with this, psychedelics or anything?
I'll say
Because
too that
you
I'm
talk
not
about this a lot, psychedelic art and text, and
right.
what's something I was curious about. Have you ever, does this have informed your process of art in any way?
So I've never done psychedelics myself, which is almost embarrassing to admit, given how often I write psychedelics into my games, or like I said, I talk about that culture. But I think for me,
You can get that with music too. Music can get you in a psychedelic state too.
I was going to say that I think that's where that came from for me. I actually I still have a difficult way, or like difficult understanding of how to talk about it, but I was straight edge until I was 31. So I didn't drink. I've still never drank, and now the only thing I do is I smoke weed. But that was so that like limitation and that sort of stance, I guess, that I took against deliberate mind altering definitely still works its way into how I think about and act, even though it's not, it's not the same, but it's akin to religious trauma of like saying I was taught this for this long, and I might not believe it anymore, but it's still like a part of me on some subconscious level. So I recognize that that's a thing. I also know I have to take SSRIs for OCD and for depression, and was told when I started taking them that if you took psychedelics or something, that they counter one another, like they're doing opposite things. Yeah. And so that always sketched me out, because my mental health always felt and continues to feel pretty fragile. And so even I think the benefits I would get from psychedelia are outweighed by the risks of my mental health being insecure. Um, but it's something
Yeah.
that's always interested me conceptually. And I also think, like you said, other things serve that purpose for me. And that
Yeah.
is, I keep calling it the flow state, but most commonly for me, I reach that space mentally or metaphysically while playing music, especially in private. Like if the band is in a space and we're playing music, like jamming for lack of a better word,
Mm-hmm.
um, versus like performance. It's weird.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily consider myself a performer, even though most of my career through music at this point is through performing. Um, I guess my identity is not wrapped up in the idea of performance so much as it is in composition and exploration. So I would say that
Yeah.
is
I
my
think we're more authentic in ourselves and we're not performing.
yes,
And one of the reasons, I thought about making this podcast a stream so people can watch, but I want to have, intimate conversations with people.
yeah,
And
right,
if we're streaming stuff, we lose that. So even though it's going to go out in a podcast afterwards, if we're just us, there's nobody else here, it
yeah,
feels a little bit more private and we can be ourselves a little bit more, right?
for sure.
Yeah. And you mentioned about being straight edge, but you also mentioned that you now use weeds. We even talked about maybe doing like a 420 zine, and
Yeah,
and and, and I never used anything of any drugs besides beer and coffee because it's society
right.
accept this stuff as normal until the pandemic like 3 years ago, and it's stuff very new to me. But
Yeah,
I'm curious about how did you find weeds in that, and how is your relationship with weeds because of
yeah.
that?
Um, I would say I don't know. I guess the zeitgeist, but like for me, I feel like I don't engage with it very much. Um, I'll smoke weed maybe once a month. And for me, it's a calming thing. It's combats some anxiety. It's definitely a social thing. If I'm on tour, I know I'll smoke more, and it will be a social activity for me. But in terms of my creative process, it doesn't really play in. I actually find it quite difficult to write if I'm stoned because staring at screens in general is really hard for me when I'm stoned. So I avoid that. Um, and yeah, so I mentioned I started when I was 31, so it was like right, I guess, a year before COVID hit, and it was a big thing for me. This was like, I think, me paying attention to my mental state more than normal and recognizing that this very present anxiety and these spiraling thoughts that later got diagnosed as OCD that makes sense to me, but at the time I didn't know, and I don't think I had health insurance, and I was just like trying to navigate all this shit on my own, and that's just hard. And I think I had dealt with that for so long, that ever present anxiety and those intrusive thoughts and stuff. The idea that there was something that was there, it's very accessible and uh helpful and like natural, and it all just kind of like, I think there was also just sort of a cultural tipping of the scales between like
True.
I think especially on the left, the devilification of drugs and the sort of like, yes, these exist and there is uh
Yeah,
everything in moderation.
because to be honest, like we are all using drugs, so then, like
Right,
coffee
like you
is a
said. Yeah,
psychedelic drug, but it's something that helps you work. So capitalism. So yeah, it's
yeah,
all good, you know.
yeah. I think as culture kind of shifted, and it allowed me to sort of, again, like push back on some of these conceptions that I had, and especially the idea that it could benefit me in this
Mental
massive
health.
struggle.
Yeah.
Yeah, that has always been a struggle, but I mean, it's always been a struggle. So here was my first idea that here was a thing that could be used as relief that was not dangerous, I guess. So that's what tipped the scales for me. And then, like I mentioned, I don't use it very often, but it's an interesting thing in that it can be utility for me. Like it can help me with those struggles, but it also can be fun and funny and
Yeah.
social. And I know that like I am someone who makes jokes and is goofy all the time, but when I'm stoned, it's like extra. So like I can be, I can get real goofy, and I think that's just fun with the right people. I'm happy
Yeah.
to get silly. So
Yes.
like, yeah, it doesn't necessarily. Well, I was gonna say it doesn't directly integrate into my creative process. And I think this is funny too, but just a couple months ago was the first time I ever got high and played music. And it did not work for me at all because
Yeah.
I mentioned that pipeline from idea to performance, like going through my brain to my hands, um, gets so muddy that I couldn't do anything. Uh,
It's a training though. I mean,
yeah, there are people. I
yeah. People
understand
get
how
used it too.
people
Yeah. Yeah.
like it and can use that, but I think because I've spent so long developing that system for me to get
Yeah.
creative
Of
without
course. Yeah.
it was actually a hindrance for me. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's still a learning thing. It's still an interesting thing. And like I live somewhere where it's legal, and so I can just like get it from the store, have it delivered, whatever. It's super weird. Um, so there's
Yeah.
again like that cultural aspect to it that it's just around.
Yeah, for sure. Like for me too, I was, I don't know, I didn't do many, transgressive things. I don't know if because of autism or anything, but as, you know, it's become more accepted and, artists that I admire, do it. And people talking about medicinal use. And there is no influence that I thought about. Every use is medicinal use. Even if you're using
Right.
for entertainment, it's still, the medical effects are still going on there. So, yeah. But talking about something else, we talked about the spirituality and art a lot, and but I wanted to ask you, do you have a religion? Do you consider yourself a spiritual person, or do you have any kind of philosophy of life that helps you navigate your struggles and how you portray and act in the world, or anything like this?
I am not religious at all. I was raised in Catholicism until I was like 12 or 13, but it was not like a huge pillar for my family, and is not anything to me now. Uh, I think I, and I definitely think from
Do you
the
believe in
world,
God?
I don't think so. Although I think uh, I definitely don't believe in a concept of this sort of human God. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I think this is another example of contextual language and subjective language, and saying like, there's a dude in the cloud is like, that's not anything to me. But
Yeah.
the idea that people are connected in ways beyond our physical understanding is not so outlandish to me. I think I mentioned a few times in this chat like the flow state and the collective consciousness and like these ideas that are vaguely like metaphysical. I do think I
Where did you
believe
get
in.
this from? Where did you get those ideas from? Where did you learn about this?
Um, this is kind of embarrassing, but I remember reading a book in like 2010 that was called "Awakening Your Psychic Powers," and I had stole it from a bookstore while I was on tour because I was into like ufology and cryptids and stuff at the time, and I was like, oh, psychic brains and past lives and all this stuff, and so I read the book, and beyond its title, beyond the sort of like almost farcical metaphysical sale thing that they're giving you, right? Like that you can use this to be powerful or whatever. It inside are like meditative exercises
Well,
that make you
have
aware
you
of.
have you been practicing your powers? Because you have
No,
to practice, or your
I
powers
don't think
won't
I have
work.
the book. Yeah, I think that's what it is. I just fell out of practice,
Yeah,
but it
yeah.
did sort of introduce me to some of these concepts and also into like meditating or like
Do you
using.
meditate?
I don't often, and I guess that was the time in my life where I did most deliberately, and it was obviously for the I was just kind of like going with this book. It's almost like when you hear about Bloody Mary, what's the first thing you're going to do is go in front of the mirror and like try it out. It's almost that kind of energy of like
Yeah.
they're talking about this in the book, so let me try it out and see what happens. And then I realize later on, I was like, oh, that's just what meditating is, or they're just giving you this sort of guided experience that is vaguely informed by this metaphysicality, but really it's this like ancient practice that they're just putting a different name on. And so yeah, I would say I like dip my toes in that, or like that sort of introduced me to some of these concepts that I could then develop and experience or understand through my own sociological and political lenses. And I think that helped long term kind of develop a greater sense of empathy and understanding. And then that's just something that I want to continue to develop and think about and work on. So that's you can call that meditation, you can call that consideration, whatever. It's just like I think that was a time in my life where I went from I think I've always been very go with the flow and kind of just like chasing whatever is next and whatever feels good in the moment. That's why I dropped out of school at 19 and started touring and like doing music full time. It wasn't for this idea of making it my career, making it anything. It was because that's what I wanted to do, and that was gratifying. And fast forward, it worked out pretty good, but like that wasn't a plan. I didn't have a plan. So I think that was the time of my life when I stopped going full impulse and just sort of like spending more deliberate time inside of my brain instead of letting my brain kind of just do whatever it wanted. And I think that practice, again, like I might not call it meditation because it's not so informed and I don't know how spiritual or just informed by practice that it is, but like me paying attention to my own thoughts and ideas, whether it be for creative ends or just emotional awareness or
Yeah.
physical awareness or whatever. That I think is my closest thing to spiritual living, is just like the desire to and the very slow lifelong process that is understanding who you are, what you want, and what it takes to make those things work together.
Yeah. And it's a constant work, right? Just learning about yourselves every day, and then
Yeah.
there's always new things to learn, I think. You mentioned about ufology and cryptids and this kind of supernatural stuff. Are you still very interested in this? Or do you believe in UFOs and aliens? Do you think they're here or anything like this?
Um, I definitely I don't I don't know. I'm less interested, or I guess I'm paying less attention to that stuff now, whereas I used to listen to podcasts and watch YouTube videos, and like there was a level of escapism to it, this sort of idea of something better that exists, or that there I think this comes from,
Reality can be more magical, right? Escapism
right,
to yeah.
yeah, and I think there's like from a logical and scientific like lens, I guess,
Have you ever
almost
seen a UFO or seen anything
no.
supernatural?
My only
Even
experience, and I think
ghosts?
this not I think my experience is not that unique, but I've had sleep paralysis a few times, and
Oh
had
yeah.
those kind of like, the shadow figure visualization that goes with that, and like kind of pure pure fear. And I know someone who had like past life memories that I was really interested in, like very interested in for a while. Was reading about and watching documentaries about and like learning about that stuff. I don't think it takes up very much of my brain space anymore, but I do think there's an innate there's both the idea of like wonder is something that is desirable, like the idea that there are things that we don't know and things that we can't know, and that's exciting, especially as people like us
Yeah.
who like to learn and like to know things. Like the idea that that's infinite is innately exciting, and I also think it makes, just like any kind of movie or TV or horror or whatever, um, these things as metaphors or these things as social thermometers are always compelling. So whether that be pure fiction or kind of skewed nonfiction, I think they're always going to be conceptually compelling.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. And it's tells a lot about the society and humanity, because you those myths kind of repeat, and it's a reflection of ourselves. And then there's a phrase that was marked by when Yo High came to the show, that uh, we are the monsters, right? Like
Right.
these creatures are us in some way.
Yeah.
If you could choose any superpower to have, what would superpower would you pick, and what would be the first thing you would do with it?
Um, I think so. The second question is like an additional qualifier, because then I need a good reason, I think. Because I think if having been asked that in the past, I would go with like magnetism. I think that's like a compelling and really strong utility. Think of like Magneto from X-Men. Uh, but now that I am thinking like what's the first thing I would do with it? Besides the sort of like cool, just like I'm a fidgeter. I've been fidgeting with this like putty eraser this whole time we've been talking, and just like smushing it and making little sculptures and then smashing the sculpture, whatever. I definitely would be doing that with metal stuff, of just like reshaping it and messing with it and playing with it like a toy. But then I
I am
think in
too.
terms
I'm
of,
messing with
yeah,
this piece of paper here. Yeah.
I think in a more utility social way, I would use that to like develop infrastructure in some way. I know, like most cities in America, we have a lot of people experiencing homelessness here, and if you could just take, like, if my power was malforming metal, there's just metal everywhere that you could just turn into structures and just like
Yeah.
have this functionality, because so much of housing and comfort is limited by access and privilege. So just like, if and again, I think this is sort of this is where superheroes and powers and stuff come into the cultural zeitgeist, is like, again, this idyllic worldview, like we could solve our problems with pointing a finger. And the idea that if I had these metal manipulations, that I could effectively like you know, solve or make a substantial dent in this housing crisis in the town that I live in, that's pretty powerful. But that power desire, that power fantasy, is why superheroes kind of connect with people, because you want to be able to fix that world.
Yeah, for sure. And I heard a lot. There's a lot about parenting too. Like superheroes are basically parents taking care of kids in some way. But yeah,
I never heard
and
that, but that
if
also immediately makes perfect sense.
makes
Like,
sense, yeah.
yeah,
You know, if you could get any weird and fantastical, sci-fi thing from fiction, from music, from games, and make it real in our world, what would you pick, and why did you pick that? And it can be an NPC, a faction, a location, a power or anything like this that would be real in our world?
Yeah. Um, my gut answer is some kind of like teleporting, like dimension door spell or a teleport gun or whatever like that. Because the physical limitations of the world, like even the idea that we're having this conversation from two countries, but
Yeah.
we're doing it digitally. Like, yes, it's a band-aid on like, our ability to communicate is there, and that's great. But
Yeah. I would
that
much
ability,
rather be in a studio next to
yeah,
you and seeing
yeah,
you, and
and
we could grab a coffee afterwards or anything like
yeah,
this. But yeah,
absolutely. And especially like as touring, a lot of the work is just travel. So I'm either on a plane or a bus or whatever, and
yeah,
there are a lot of the fun, memorable times had in transit, but there's also just like a lot of exhaustion and demoralization that comes from just long transit. And when I'm on tour and my partner's here, like we miss each other. I would love to be able to
oh
spend
yeah,
that time rather than being in a city that I don't know and can't hardly function in. I'd rather be connected to somebody. Um, so yeah, I think any kind of portal uh, thing would solve
yeah.
that.
Yeah. It kind of made us appreciate technology a little bit more too, like because as I said, we're in different city, we can still
Yeah,
talk to our loved ones,
it
and
does scratch
I
that
that's
itch. Yeah, like and having
yeah,
FaceTime and just being able like
yeah,
the distinction between that and texting or something is already so much more real and human. It's
yeah,
something for sure.
yeah. Finally, do you remember the last time you felt really happy and just grateful for being here and being alive? And if you do, can you share with us how was that for you and when was that moment?
um, I would say, I mean, I think that's a feeling that I thankfully get fairly frequently. As long as it comes back to what I was saying earlier of just like paying attention and hearing yourself and checking in with your vibes and all that. Um, I would
Do you have
say
a
that
routine for of gratitude or checking in?
I
Do you
don't.
feel that or no? Yeah.
No, that my partner does and can sort of help facilitate that in me, but it's not necessarily an active routine for me. But I would say even recently, Will and we restarted the Brain Trust podcast, and we're calling it the next season or whatever. But we're kind of just doing it again in a more deliberate way, and recording that and releasing that and seeing people interested and caring about that is probably a really gratifying moment. But it's also um, very rewarding to because we took some time off with I was on tour and then PAX happened and all that we hadn't recorded since August. And but just being in the routine of having 2 hours a week where I'm on the phone with my best friend and we're being creative and goofing off and like that's
Yeah.
so immediately satisfying, and making that part of my weekly routine again instead of having it just happen when it happens is fostering that and continuing to like make that feeling of joy like more reliable and last longer.
Yeah. It's connection to like having these habits of meeting a friend or like someone a peer, someone you admire to, and
Yeah,
then the podcast is doing this for me. Like I have the chance to once or twice a week to meet peers and friends and just having a chat, and it's fantastic. So I'm sure it's just like this for you too. So
yeah.
uh,
Tangentially, my partner's coffee shop, which uh, I'm like we're planning to hopefully expand some this year, but that very much serves that role for me of I can go in and be connected to people and like because it's our place. Our friends stopped by like just this weekend. I went in because my friend Mitch, who's doing the art for Bloodborg, was there. And while I was waiting for Mitch, our friend Steve was there and we were talking about movies. And it's like, it is my cultural hub. And being there and seeing that culture flourish, and also seeing how Alex kind of fosters that again through the community and through that compassion and creativity is like innately super rewarding as well. Just getting to be part of it, getting to be around it, just kind of that bliss state being shared among a small community. Like that's the good stuff for sure.
Yeah, it's all about that. It's all about people and being seeing yourself part of something bigger, right?
Yeah.
Well, Adam, those were all the questions I had. I'm so thank you for you being here and sharing your wisdom, sharing your experiences. I'm a really huge fan of your work. As I said, you're like in some ways you're like who I want to be someday. So do you have any last message for the weirdos out there that are listening to us?
I'm very flattered, and I also think the same of your work very often, and see how the quality and of the stuff that you're putting out. And I have a oh hi, my dog just showed up. I have like stacks of your games that I've picked up through used to be drive through, and now I get them through Exalted. But I just like pick up everything because I know if your name's on it, like it's a quality thing. So I appreciate that. As for everyone else, no, I just like I get my big thing, and the thing that I think I come back to as a creative is just like encouraging other people to be creative and to question. Like I think so many people say I don't draw anymore, I don't do X anymore. It's like, well, you can like try to diminish or minimize that sort of social stigma that you have to make things for work, or you have to be productive, or it has to be good, or it has to make money or whatever, and just make things for the sake having intrinsic value for the creative process. And with that, I think just try for both people who don't consider themselves creative, and then people like us who make that such a big pillar of who they are. Try things that you don't know how to do, and that aren't related to, or like maybe not explicitly related to the work that you're doing. Like I was mentioning that I want to learn how to engrave glass, and I bought some tools and I'm going to try that out. Just like, don't give up that sort of childish
curiosity,
wonder,
exploration.
Yeah, and just do stuff to see what happens.
Yeah. It's like when we play games, like just play to see what happens, and it's impressive. It's very applicable to life, just play to see what happens, experiment. And I borrowed ukulele just to try to learn it, so
awesome.
I'm gonna do just that. So Adam, can you just, that's the end of the show, can you just take us out, saying the catchphrase of the show? Keep it weird, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for listening. I've been Adam Vass, here with Diogo, and keep it weird, everybody.
Thank you for listening to Weird Games and Weirder People. If you'd like to keep up with the show, please subscribe to be notified when we release new episodes. If you'd like to support us, please leave a review or head on to co-fi.com/WGNWP. See you next time, and remember, weird is the new wonderful.